Yeah.
So good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us to mark the formation of a partnership between the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and the Armenian Genocide Institute. Bonjour tout le monde et merci d'être présent ce matin pour être présent à cette entente formelle entre le Musée canadien pour les droits de la personne et l'Institut arménien du génocide qui mènera les deux organisations à travailler conjointement à la promotion des droits de la personne dans le cadre de projets communs. We will begin with a few preliminary words by President and CEO Stuart Murray, followed by Hayk Demoyan, Director of the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute, then George Sherinian, Executive Director of the Zoryan Institute. We also have Jack Gerbert, whose father, Harry, survived the Armenian genocide before coming to Manitoba, who will talk to us today. And we'll also hear from the ambassador, His Excellency Armenian Genocide, who will also speak to us this morning. We will then proceed to the signing ceremony of the agreement between the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute. And we'll conclude with a time for media interviews. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Stuart Ford for his introductory remarks.
Merci, Christelle. Today, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights signs an important agreement with the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute. Merci d'être présent ce matin. Je suis content de pouvoir partager avec vous des nouvelles sur le droit de la personne. We are very pleased to welcome to Winnipeg Dr. Hayk Demoyan, the director of the Museum Institute. We're also honored to have the Armenian ambassador to Canada with us this morning, Ambassador Armenian Genocide. Welcome. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights presents us both with the responsibility and the opportunity to build a future that recognizes and respects the inherent worth and humanity for all. The museum stands as a promise that we really can break down barriers to human dignity and opportunity and still stand in the way of our fellow citizens. The museum stands as a promise that while the language of human rights will always include a sober look at humanity's past failings, it also is a language of possibility, built on the conviction that we can create a tomorrow that is better than today. And the museum stands as a promise to our children, a promise that there will always and forever be a place in Canada in the world that respects and celebrates the right to be who they are, where everyone can feel welcome, where everyone has a voice, where everyone can play a part in building the kind of world that we in this room want our children to inherit. This is the vision of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and we move closer to reaching it with each new step that we're taking and we're able to take together. The core of our offering, the heart of the museum experience, is an inspiring encounter with human rights. Le core de l'expérience que nous proposons au musée, c'est des rencontres inspirantes avec le droit de la personne. This means creating a place that, above all else, is about hope and possibility. Yes, it's about acknowledging and learning from the past, but more than that, it's about building a future. We do this at the museum by creating opportunities for dialogue, opportunities to share our own story, to learn from each other, to identify what each of us can contribute to this much larger goal. Respect and protection for human rights is hard to build, but so easy to destroy. Every society that embraces human rights has to be continually vigilant to promote, protect those human rights. We must also teach young people about human rights so that they understand that the task of promoting and protecting human rights is theirs. This is something that museums of conscience can do well, and we are very pleased to be joining hands with the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute to promote education, awareness, and dialogue about human rights. It is always special when museums of conscience of human rights can come together. We have a big job to do, and there clearly is much work yet to be done. But together, we can accomplish it. The Armenian Genocide, which began in 1915, was a violation at almost unimaginable scale. Millions of people were murdered, millions more sexually assaulted, robbed, left homeless, or orphaned. Canada and Manitoba received some of these orphans, and we will be privileged to hear from the family of one such individual this morning. The Armenian Genocide is an important human rights story. The concept of crime against humanity was developed in response to this horrible series of violations against the Armenian people. The crime of genocide was also developed with reference to the attacks against Armenians. The first international reaction to this genocide resulted in a joint statement by France, Russia, and Great Britain in May of 1915, where those atrocities directed against the Armenian people were identified, and I quote, "new crimes against humanity and civilization," end quote. In 2004, the Canadian House of Commons, on behalf of all Canadians, passed a resolution to recognize this genocide. In struggling against the persistent denial of this genocide, the human rights community has sharpened its understanding of the importance of survivor testimony and how crucial it is to face history honestly, and that way we can ensure we develop a genuine human rights culture. One of our museum staff members, Dr. Clint Curl, who's with us today, traveled to Armenia earlier this past year with the president and met with the president and executive director of the Zoryan Institute, who is here with us today. George, thank you so much. To meet with Dr. Demoyan, to get a first-hand look at the work being done at the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute. After this connection, for which we do thank the Zoryan Institute so much for their opportunity to bring us together, our two organizations began the process of forming a partnership to advance our shared goals of advancing human rights education, reconciliation, and justice. And that is why we are here signing this agreement today. We are pleased to partner with the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute in order to raise awareness of the Armenian Genocide here in Canada and indeed around the globe. And we will do that by drawing out the human rights lessons that are relevant today as they were in 1915. Merci de m'avoir accordé votre attention. Thank you so much.
So before we move forward, I would just like to acknowledge the presence of, we have a member of the clergy here. So next, I'll now ask Dr. Hayk Demoyan, Director of the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute, to say a few words on behalf of his organization.
Thank you very much. Mr. Murray, Your Excellency, Ambassador of Armenia, and distinguished guests. It is a great pleasure to be here participating in this very important signing ceremony, which became possible with invaluable support and assistance of the International Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies, a division of the Zoryan Institute of Canada. We highly value this document to be signed with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and see it as an important part of the Armenian Genocide Museum activities regarding academic exchange and cooperation. Within the last 2 years, IIGHRS signed several other cooperation agreements with a number of museums and organizations worldwide to spread knowledge about the Armenian genocide and other genocides committed in various regions and periods. This is a new beginning at the threshold of the centennial of the Armenian genocide, the lessons of which still remain unlearned and untaught. The establishment of new interconnected worldwide community of museums dealing with genocide and human rights violations and their consequences is an idea we are working towards to help fight effectively against such evil. Unfortunately, we still live in an age of genocide. Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, to name only a few recent cases, prove that we still face profound human rights violations globally. This unfortunate reality compels us to take responsibility and find ways to create early warning system to help prevent new occurrences of genocide. There is an urgent need for prevention, and genocide scholars have to have a special role in this important mission. Human rights museums can be the platform to help those scholars reach the public as part of global efforts to raise awareness of genocide among the nations of the world. We have a specific task to represent history truthfully and educate future generations. To accomplish this, we need to bring together our ideas, resources, and actions. From this perspective, I have no doubt that the crucial mission of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights extends beyond Canada's borders, and also will provide a good platform for human rights education and prevention globally. Canada, as a champion of universal human rights, confronting officially some dark chapters of its own history, and now establishing such a museum with the tremendous support of Canadian government, is one of the most valid examples of how a government can demonstrate political will to create powerful instrument for human rights education. The Armenian Genocide, the Holocaust, and other cases of horrible crimes of genocide and human rights violations still face denial with high-level support. In order to leave no chance for those denialist efforts to succeed, we have to set common agenda and work hand in hand to fight this everywhere. At the threshold of the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, we appreciate the Canadian government taking the right path in terms of its official recognition, condemnation of denial, and promotion of education about the Armenian Genocide, an act much appreciated by the Armenian community both in Canada and worldwide. I am confident that today's ceremony will be not only a good starting point for cooperation between both museums, but also will contribute to further strengthening the bridge between the Armenians and Canadian people in combating and preventing the violation of human rights globally, especially genocide and genocide denial. It should be with this shared goal in mind that we come together today to forge this very important partnership. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Hayk. I would like now to pass the microphone to Greg Sarkissian. He's the president of the Zoryan Institute.
Mr. Murray, Your Excellency Ambassador of the Republic of Armenia, Dr. Demoyan, Your Worship, distinguished guests. It is a great pleasure to see the culmination of our coordinated effort between the representative of the Canadian Museum of Human Rights and the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute of National Academy of Sciences that led the signing of this agreement, which will facilitate cooperation for the promotion of human rights through joint projects and education. The significance of the Armenian genocide is now understood by scholars as the precursor and prototype of modern genocide, whereby a government targets a group of its own citizens identifiable by ethnicity or religion for extermination as a perceived answer to its political problems. The global response to mass murder of Armenians in Ottoman Empire in 1915 resulted in the introduction of the concept of crime against humanity, as Dr. Murray mentioned in his speech, into the international legal system. As he mentioned, the first international reaction to genocide resulted in the joint statement of France, Russia, and Great Britain. I will save the time repeating the declaration just to proceed on the rest of my speech. It is indeed with great satisfaction and pleasure pleasure that we saw as Canadians in 2004, the Canadian House of Commons passed a resolution to recognize this genocide. The CMHR is very deliberately and consciously a place of human rights. Moreover, the very inclusion of the Holocaust as the major example of gross violation of human rights proves the essential nature of genocide in any comprehensive approach to human rights. As one studies history, one must acknowledge the numerous linkages that exist between the Holocaust as the museum's central example of gross violation of human rights and the Armenian Genocide. Those links serve as a model of approaching all cases of genocides, such as Rwanda, Srebrenica, the Ukrainian Holodomor, just to name a few, is in a comparative manner. As the CMHR researchers and curators develop their exhibits, texts, and displays, I am sure they are discovering for themselves how much the cases of genocide covered in the museum have in common with violation of human rights, and how much they have in common with each other while retaining their respective uniqueness. We at the International Institute of Genocide and Human Rights, a division of Zoryan Institute, look forward to CMHR's taking a comprehensive and comparative approach to all cases of genocide. It would complement perfectly the objectives of Canada's official policy of multiculturalism. It especially would make those communities who feel their histories have been neglected or denied feel more welcome. One cannot overestimate the psychological trauma of those who are part of a nation that has experienced genocide. The comparative approach will help those Canadians share the understanding of their traumatic experience with their fellow Canadians and the world at large. The comparative approach will enhance the public's understanding of complexities of this phenomenon, promote respect to others, and encourage reflection and dialogue, which are fundamental objectives of CMHR. Only through a comparative study of such cases can we find general truth about the nature and the mechanics of this phenomenon as a general problem of humanity, which can help us find solution to how genocide can eventually prevent. It was a dream when we first met with Ms. Gail Asper back in 2003, and she described so passionately her father's vision to have a museum of human rights. We exchanged our personal stories as Canadians of Jewish and Armenian extraction, two groups who had experienced a profound tragedy perpetrated against them simply because they were perceived differently from the majority. We felt an instant bond not only because of the traumatic nature of our pasts, but also because her father's dream and vision resounded perfectly with the work of our institute since 1982. Today, with this signing ceremony, Mr. Asper's vision now expands beyond the borders of Canada by establishing such partnerships, promising to yield rich results in the exchange of research materials, information, ideas, and much more. This is no longer a dream. It is here. It is happening. And just last week it was declared that the official opening will be in September 2004. We look forward to serving as a liaison between the two museums, facilitating their ongoing cooperation. Finally, the development of human rights in history has often come as a reaction to the absence of violation of human rights in the first place. And genocide is commonly understood as the ultimate violation of human rights. One must understand the hard-fought struggle for human rights in history in order to understand the importance of making the kind of world we all want for the future. This is what CMHR is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Now I would like to invite Jack Gerbert. Jack's father, Harry Gerbert, lost both parents in the Armenian Genocide, and as a young orphan, he ended up in Killarney, Manitoba. This is such an interesting story and connects our province to the genocide. Jack will tell you a little bit about his father's story.
I'd like to thank the Museum for Human Rights for inviting myself and my brother David to come today. I'll start out by saying my father was born Garbid Hartunya, about 1906. Unfortunately, I have very little information about my dad's early years, just what I remember him telling me as a young boy and a young man. I remember Dad telling me of his parents' demise and his family. He was the oldest of 6. He spoke of his father being taken away in the night and murdered. They took Dad away, placed him in a Turkish orphanage. He believed his mother escaped to Egypt with some of the younger children. He was forced to worship Mahadim and schooled by the Turks. God only knows what happened to my grandmother and her children. I can remember times when he would recite prayers by kneeling on his knees. It would always make us roar with laughter. He talked about how his mom made Turkish rugs. They would bring bags of wool already weighed, and she would hook them. He helped her after school. She was allowed to keep a small amount of the wool when the rug was done. He explained how he had been encouraged to sneak out of the orphanage one night by an older friend, and how they ran and escaped into the countryside. They existed on their wits and hand to mouth. The Salvation Army somehow got a hold of these boys, and with a third one, shipped them to Canada. I acquired sailing records from the Salvation Army, and he was separated from the other 2 in Montreal. The reason he did not stay east is because he wanted to ride on a train. He had never seen one, and he was intrigued. It brought him to Winnipeg, and from there, he was placed with the farmers in the Killarney area. He told me how wonderful the people were to him, as he spoke almost no English. He found out later they had taught him cuss words, as it was funny to hear them with an accent. He was very happy in his early years in Canada. He never spoke of being lonely or the old country. As he made so many new friends, he worked hard and eventually bought his own land and farmed. He told me how he made a comb out of nails in the early years, as he had no money and his hair was quite long. He served in the Canadian Army overseas for 6 years and was a local respected politician for 30 years. As he grew older, he always said he was so grateful to have been blessed with coming to a free country as Canada. And to his dying day, he thanked God for the Salvation Army, his wonderful family, and #1, Canada. My dad had 5 children, one who's deceased. There are numerous grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and I can go on from there. It's approximately 65, and that's quite a dynasty from one little Armenian orphan. I was asked the question, how do I feel as a son of a survivor? I feel proud. I feel proud of what my father became. I'm not as proud of my keeping up my origin. I never once to this day ever, if someone says what's your nationality, I usually say Armenian because I am proud of being that. Every day the curiosity eats me up to wonder what might have happened to my grandfathers, my uncle,
my grandma. You know, it's quite a thing. But with the help of this museum, it's helped me better to understand, and things are starting to come out. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jack. Finally, I would like to invite His Excellency Ambassador Hayk Demoyan to speak.
Mr. Murray, Mr. Demoyan, Your Eminence, again, and I see leadership of Armenian National Committee of Canada, Akopter Khachaturian, and all guests and friends. Indeed, this is a very important day, and I simply reflect on what was I and what was Armenian Yerevan and Museum of Genocide back 35 years ago. I was telling Mr. Murray that the only allowed ran away from the school was on April 24th, and we would all the school children would go to Tzitsernakaberd to pay a tribute to the victims of 1.5 million of Armenians. And that was during the Soviet Union, strangely enough. Then it was a monument, beautiful monument. Today we see the incredible expansion of the Museum of Genocide and Institute already. Today, under the leadership of my friend Hayk, the Museum and Institute put lots of emphasis to the research and education. And today I witnessed that monument that became museum, became institute, signing a memorandum with CMHR, Canadian Museum of Human Rights. This is really incredible. This is we're witnessing, and that's why I have hope that justice will prevail. It is prevailing already. On behalf of Armenian government and Armenian people, Mr. Murray, and all the people that are working hard for this establishment, I would like to express our deep gratitude. I would like to stress that this is not only Armenian issue or Armenian-Turkish issue. This is unfortunately international issue. And fairly enough, Canadian government decided to have all officially recognized 5 genocides be displaced in this museum. What we need to do is we have to get down to business. There are words and there are deeds. What we're witnessing today is a very specific, concrete deed. This is another proof of Canada's real leadership on human rights issues. Thank you very much.
Now I would like to invite Stuart and Hayk to officially formalize the partnership between the Canadian Museum of Human Rights and the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute by signing the Memorandum of Understanding. And Greg Sarkissian of the Zoryan Institute will witness the signatures.
Greg, you got a good job at
Before the exchange, just put on it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes the formal part of our event today. I would like to invite members of the press to remain present